Of chewing apple and slurping hot chocolate on this tape here. But here we go. We are now to chapter 14, verses 24 to 27. And we have we covered that already. And we covered the pronouncement against the Philistines in chapter 14, verses 28 to 32. Where Ahaz dies, the Philistines rejoice, but Philistine is warned not to rejoice because Ahaz's son is Hezekiah, who will in turn sting them like a viper. Now we come to the pronouncement against Moab in chapter 15, starting at verse 1, and it takes us all the way down to 16:14. And you may wonder why some countries only merit a few verses of judgment and other countries merit a whole lot. Here we have two chapters full of a pronouncement against Moab. And yet the Philistines, or Palestina, only gets something like 4 or 5 verses. And some of the other countries only get a few verses too. But that's the way it is in prophecy, and I don't know of the reason. And the reason probably lies in the historical significance of each one of these countries, and as their history mingled with Israel's, and how they impacted Israel. Of course, Moab. What is Moab famous for? Do you remember how Moab is famous for her women? Famous for how they used their women to weaken and demoralize the nation way back in Balaam's time. Balak and Balaam, and the famous donkey episode, which is, by the way, a very good lesson for us to always keep in our consciousness. If Satan can't get us one way, he will attempt to destroy us another way. So here we have the pronouncement against Moab from chapter 15, verse 1 to chapter 16, verse 14. Notice that the key tone in this whole passage is one of mourning and weeping and howling and wailing. It seems like this is reserved for Moab alone. I mean, there's the other pronouncements, there's a lot of grief going on as well, and they're told that they're going to weep and wail, but none like Moab. Listen, because in the night Ar of Moab is laid waste and brought to silence, because in the night Ker of Moab is laid waste and brought to silence, he has gone up to Bajith and to Dibon, the high places, to weep. Moab shall howl over Nebo. Verse 3, in their streets everyone shall howl, weeping abundantly. Verse 4, Heshbon shall cry, their voice shall be heard, the armed soldiers shall cry out, his life shall be grievous to him. My heart, even Isaiah, listen, Isaiah is so gripped by what is going to happen to Moab that he says, my heart shall cry out for Moab. By the mounting up of Luhith, with weeping shall they go it up, for in the way of Horonaim they shall raise up. All of these geographical locations are cities or villages in Moab, okay? So he's naming them all. And there's crying and weeping and wailing throughout this chapter and the next. So, first of all, under the heading the pronouncement against Moab, we have in verses 1 to 3, the general destruction of Moab elicits great mourning. Mourning as in M-O-U-R-N-I-N-G, or grief. The general destruction of Moab elicits great grief. Verses 1 to 3. In verses 4 and 5, even the soldiers and Isaiah join the lament. This is emphatic. I mean, here the soldiers, grown men who are used to bloodshed and tragedy, are crying out and are despairing. And it's unusual that the prophet who is pronouncing the judgment is grief-stricken as well for Moab, which I think also reflects the heart of God. Verses 6 to 9, we are told that even the natural resources and wealth will fail. The waters of Nimrim shall be desolate. The hay is withered, the grass fails, there is no green thing. Therefore the abundance they have gotten, and that which they have laid up, shall they carry away to the brook of the willows. Pardon me?
That'll be Babylon.
The brook of the willows? My margin says the valley of the Arabians. I did not look that up. For the cry is gone round about the borders of Moab, the howling thereof unto Eglaim, and the howling thereof unto Beer Elim. For the waters of Dimon shall be full of blood, for I will bring more upon Dimon, lions upon him that escapeth of Moab, and upon the remnant of the land. It's interesting to notice that, let's see, Moab, where is Moab on the map, James?
Right side.
To the right side?
We didn't have one that was detailed with all the cities.
Yes. Alright. There's Moab on the right side.
There's Arnon.
Okay.
It's a mountain. Or not, it's a brook.
Um,
There's Dibok.
okay.
Did I mention that?
Yep. That's our phone. Hello? 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 Hello?
Wait over on channel.
No, it automatically changes channels downstairs. Hello, is someone there? It's gone, whoever it was. If it rings again, we'll let them answer downstairs, and I won't answer, because I think it confused the caller, because my wife answered downstairs too, and then she hung up. And so the caller thought that I hung up, and so he hung up. Okay, this is really going to confuse Phil. Here we go. I read in the commentary that there are a couple of cities in Moab that were used as kind of stockades for prisoners of war on their way to Assyria and Babylon. And so this is kind of significant. If this is a historical fact, it becomes significant because Moab would have also gotten rich off of the booty and the spoil that would come through that land. You know, I mean, the soldiers want to sell off their stuff that they got from Jerusalem or wherever, and Moab would stand to gain from what was going on. At least some of the cities would, and certainly there's trade routes going through Moab as well. So there's great wealth in Moab, and Moab loses her wealth. That's what's predicted in Isaiah's pronouncement against Moab. So in verses 6 to 9, the natural resources and wealth fail them. Now look at in chapter 16 how things change. This is still dealing with Moab, but in chapter 16 verses 1 to 4a, refuge can be bought with the price of lambs as tribute. Send ye the lamb to the ruler of the land, from Selah to the wilderness unto the mount of the daughter of Zion. For it shall be that as a wandering bird cast out of the nest, so the daughters of Moab shall be at the fords of Arnon. The fords of Arnon, it sounds like they are refugees looking for a place of safety, and the question is, can the refugees get safe passage? Well, you can if you pay tribute to Jerusalem in lambs. This is not unusual. There are records of tribute being paid by the 100,000 head of lamb to certain kings in that area. People would pay tribute to, you can become a vassaldom, for instance, a king who seeks protection from another king. It's kind of like an extortion arrangement. I'll leave you alone, but you have to pay me 50,000 lambs, a ton of grain, that kind of thing. We make a deal. And this time it goes the other way around. It says that tribute can be paid to the mount of the daughter of Zion. You're going to pay tribute to Jerusalem to get safety and refuge in Jerusalem, or in Judah. That's what's going on here. Verse 3, take counsel, execute judgment, make thy shadow as the night in the midst of the noonday, hide the outcasts, bewray not him that wandereth. Let mine outcasts dwell with thee, Moab. Be thou a covert to them from the face of the spoiler, for the extortioner is at an end, the spoiler ceaseth, the oppressors are consumed out of thy land, and in mercy shall the throne be established, and he shall sit upon it in truth, the tabernacle of David, judging and seeking judgment and hasting righteousness. Moab is being offered peace. Moab is being offered refuge. They are being offered a chance. Okay? And comfort is being offered to her. This is verse 4b to verse 5. Comfort offered to the enemy. This is unusual in a pronouncement of judgment where comfort is being offered to the enemy. They're being given an opportunity to make a right choice. But look at verse 6. Moab's pride becomes her barrier. We have heard of the pride of Moab. He is very proud, even of his haughtiness and his pride and his wrath. He is proud of his haughtiness and his pride and his wrath. That's pretty proud. If you're proud of your pride, I not only think I'm somebody, but I'm proud of how I think that I'm somebody. But his lies shall be not so. Therefore shall Moab howl for Moab. Everyone shall howl. For the foundations of Kir Hareseth shall ye mourn. Surely they are stricken. And so here he goes again into the lament and back into the judgment for Moab. And so I think that, again, we see judgment. It's unusual, but here we see an offer of peace and perhaps even pardon and mercy for sure. In mercy shall the throne be established, but bang, there's the pride again, the arrogance. And that's the reason, and the Word of God nails it down. The reason for the judgment is the pride, because in verse 7 it says, therefore, for this reason shall Moab howl, because of her pride, because she just didn't smarten up. And so in verses 7 to 10, Moab returns to her weeping and wailing. Instead of taking up the house of David's offer, she returns to her weeping and wailing. In verse 11, look at King James, verse 11. Wherefore my bowels shall sound like a harp. I can't believe it. What it means, of course, here is the term bowels is an expression of my deep-seated emotions. Okay, my compassion. It's his compassion is going out for Moab. It's not that he's suddenly become very musical down below. That happens when you eat beans. But, oh my, try and read that in the pulpit and see if it brings the place down. And use that as an argument, by the way, for guys. No, forget it. You're sick of the issue. Okay, I'm not going to bring it up again.
What does it mean?
I'm just looking. What verse is that? Verse 11, 16, 11.
This
My heart laments for Moab like a harp. My inmost being for Kir Hareseth. Yes?
Is the deep sorrow crying is expressed from the indeed bow with the destiny.
His heart.
Yeah.
Heart.
So here is Korean meaning is the destiny. Here
Intestine.
is
The bowel, yeah.
So bowel is seen with the destiny.
Yeah.
Ocean. So the express of the deep sorrow.
That's right. Okay. So Isaiah laments for Moab in verse 11 again, just as he did in the previous chapter. He himself is so deeply affected by Moab's judgment. And in verse 12, we have Moab's futile prayer. Moab's futile prayer. It shall come to pass when it is seen that Moab is weary on the high place, that he shall come to his sanctuary to pray, but he shall not prevail. The Hebrew poetry here is still part of the song or part of the poem. Let me read it in the NIV. It's not that she comes to Jerusalem's sanctuary and fails in her prayer there. When Moab appears at her high place, she only wears herself out. When she goes to her shrine to pray, it is to no avail. So his high place, and it's not that Moab goes to his high place and gets weary up there and therefore goes to the sanctuary. That's how it sounds in the English here. But it's parallel structure. He will come when he is seen that Moab is weary on the high. It just is that he is weary on the high place, and it doesn't work, and he prays and it doesn't prevail. It's just saying the same thing in two different ways. It's parallel structure here. So Moab's prayers are futile, and there we have Moab's final destiny, verse 13 and 14. At least as far as this pronouncement is concerned. This is the word that the Lord has spoken concerning Moab since that time. But now the Lord has spoken, saying, within 3 years, as the years of a hireling, and the glory of Moab shall be condemned, with all that great multitude, and the remnant shall be very small and feeble. Moab will dwindle to a very insignificant and small power. We now have a pronouncement against Damascus in chapter 17, the burden of Damascus, or the judgment against Damascus. We have in verses 1 to 6 the description of judgment. Again, you notice that the agriculture of the country is affected. Every time you see that the agricultural economy, agri-economy if you want to call it that, fails, it is a bright, bold arrow pointing back to the Deuteronomic covenant that was made with the people, where God specifically said, if you do not obey my commandments, if you do not follow my word, your cattle will fail, your crops will fail. Okay? So this is always a direct reference right back to that major covenant that God made with his people.
The interesting is the idol which the Israel adopted from the neighbor country is related to the harvest, sun and water.
Yeah.
But God punished the harvest.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So we have the description of the judgment in verses 1 to 6, where it affects the agriculture of the land. Then in verses 7 to 8 we have the result of judgment. And look at this. At that day shall a man look to his Maker, and his eyes shall have respect to the Holy One of Israel. And he shall not look to the altars, the work of his hands, neither shall respect that which his fingers have made, either the groves or the images. In that day shall his strong cities be as a forsaken bough, and an uppermost branch which they left because of the children of Israel, and there shall be desolation. Kind of an interesting juxtaposition, where on one hand it seems they return to the Lord, but the judgment continues. So in verse 7 to 8 we have the result of judgment. In verses 9 to 11, the reason for judgment. Verse 9 to 11. In verse 10 it says, because thou hast forgotten the God of thy salvation, and hast not been mindful of the rock of thy strength, therefore shalt thou plant pleasant plants, and shalt set it with strange slips. In the day shalt thou make thy plant to grow, and in the morning shalt thou make thy seed to flourish, but the harvest shall be a heap in the day of grief and of desperate sorrow. The reason for judgment: you've forgotten the God of your salvation. Then in verses 12 to 14, I like this phrase. You'll hear me say it a lot. Resistance is futile. How many of you ever saw... how many of you are Trekkie fans, Star Trek fans? I watched Star Trek all the time when it was on, because there's, along with a lot of New Age philosophy, there was some real neat lessons. That
now?
Yeah,
It's
on TV.
It's still on, isn't it?
Is it? And at any rate, there was an episode or two where Picard and his crew met up with the Borg. The Borg. Anyone? No one? You remember? Remember the famous line from the Borg? Resistance is futile. You will be assimilated. Remember? That's exactly what's happening here. Listen. Woe to the multitude of many people, which make a noise like the noise of the seas, and to the rushing of nations, that make a rushing like the rushing of mighty waters. The nations shall rush like the rushing of many waters, but God shall rebuke them. They shall flee far off, and shall be chased as the chaff of the mountains before the wind, and like a rolling thing before the whirlwind. And behold, at eventide trouble, and before the morning he is not. This is the portion of them that spoil us, and the lot of them that rob us. Now, in verse 12 and 13, you have a literary device going on that we in English call an onomatopoeia. Do you know what that is? Where the word sounds like what it means. If I say burp, that's an onomatopoeia. It sounds like what it describes, okay? Here, in the Hebrew, you may wonder why he used the word rushing so much. The nations rush like the rushing of many waters, but God shall rebuke them, they shall flee. In verse 12, the noise of the seas to the rushing of nations that make a rushing like the rushing of mighty waters. Okay, same word used over and over again, and in the Hebrew it sounds like the marching of feet. Armies, multitudes. Okay, this is a terrible sound coming at you, but it said God will rebuke them, and these massive armies are going to be like leaves in the wind, just blown away at the word of God. Like chaff of the mountains before the wind, like a rolling thing, like a tumbleweed in a whirlwind. In eventide, there's going to be news of trouble. Before the morning, you're going to be gone. You won't wake up to see a new day. So that's judgment for Damascus. Now, in chapter 18, verse 1 to 7, we have judgment against Ethiopia. I'm not going to break that down for you. Chapter 19, verse 1 to 25, we have the burden against Egypt, or pronouncement against Egypt. I'm going to let that one go by, as well as chapter 20, verses 1 to 6. And here's a prophecy of Assyria, or against Assyria. Oh, I'm sorry. 19:1. Against Egypt and Cush. And then we're going to do chapter 21 together. We're going to read chapter 21, and we're going to outline it together here, okay? This will be our exercise And if we get this one done, then we're going to get chapter 22, go to chapter 22 as well. Some natural headings.
I'd say 1 or 2. 1 and 2 is a section, and then 3 and 4 is.
And why do you say that?
Because 1 and 2 seem to be he's declaring a vision, like that he has one. And then the 3 and 4 is what it's done to him, like his reaction.
Okay. All right. So in verses 1 and 2, what would you call it?
The vision.
Ta-da.
Desert vision.
A desert vision? Do you wonder why this is called desert? This is a prophecy against Babylon, but it says an oracle concerning the desert by the sea. You don't wonder?
Oh,
you do.
You have to ask yourself these questions. What does this mean? What does that mean? So, can I erase this?
Yeah.
That'll just give you an excuse to do it again.
Yeah. I memorized best on the blackboard. I memorize things by reference of where they are on a page. I already close my eyes and
Oh, is that right?
reconstruct the page.
Verses 1 and 2, call it, let's just for now, we can fancy it up later, let's just call it the vision. What I do when I try to crack a passage apart to get its sections and headings, first of all I do this, I give it the headings, okay? Then I go back and make notes down here and ask myself questions. What does this mean in verses 1 and 2? What does this mean here? What does this mean here? Okay? I look up the geographical locations if I've never heard of these villages before, or if I've never heard of certain names of characters. Go back and refresh my memory of who they were and what the relationships were. Then, and thus I just add to the body of data that I need to make sense of the chapter. So one of the questions later on that we're going to ask is, what is the desert of the sea? Why does Isaiah call Babylon the desert by the sea? So we have verses 1 and 2, the vision. What does the vision entail? A grievous vision is declared unto me. The treacherous dealer dealeth treacherously. I'll bet you. There's wordplay going on here. The traitor betrays the looter, takes loot. It'd be nice, but I can't read it just like that. It takes some study.
You could look up those 2 words for me.
Yeah, I could.
Do you want it?
Yeah.
On the library. What
Okay.
else would you like?
Get a Bible encyclopedia with no, that won't work. Yeah, well, you need all. Is there one? Do you have a 1-volume Bible encyclopedia? Okay, bring them. Sounds good. Yeah. What do you say?
Septuagint.
No. Okay, while we're waiting, 3 and 4. Verse 3 and 4. Therefore are my loins filled with pain, pangs have taken hold upon me as the pangs of a woman that travails. I was bowed down at the hearing of it, I was dismayed at the seeing of it, my heart panted, fearfulness affrighted me, the night of my pleasure hath he turned into fear unto me. What does that sound like to you?
Results of the vision
The results of the vision being,
within himself.
doesn't it strike you odd that this is all physical?
Yes.
Yeah. Hebrew Bible lexicon. There's your lexicon there.
Okay.
And what's Younger's? Maybe the Younger's one. And this is Wycliffe, right? I think Ellie had this actually. It's maybe your book. Ellie Peters.
Oh, thank you. Nice for a book to find its way home.
It's has.
And it has a Northland
I wrote her
college
name in
card
it.
in it?
I wrote her name in it because she lent it to me. Maybe it was from the college library.
Oh, okay. Well,
Just one volume.
I don't remember having that.
Okay.
Okay, would you continue working on your headings while I'm looking up the Hebrew here? Work on the headings. I'll give you a clue. I think most of those from verses 1 to 10 are divided up into pairs of 2 verses each. And it will likely come apart that way.
Dying in the truck. Came down the
Okay. Listen to the first lines of verse 2 in the Hebrew. You won't understand it, but you'll get the sound. Hadzoth kasha hu gath li. That was line 1. Habogeth bogeth. Wa beshodeth shodeth. So it rhymes, and it also sounds very similar. And so that's what he's trying to do in the poetry. He's trying to emphasize the treacherous dealer dealeth treacherously, and the spoiler spoileth. Okay, I'd like to know what that means, though, in relationship to Babylon.
Well, was the Babylon treacherous dealer?
Well, that would be easy to infer, but I don't be satisfied with just the obvious. You got to dig a little bit, and maybe a commentator will help you understand what that means. Okay, where are you going, James? Okay, we have a few in here. Here's Ironside. You want to look up Ironside and see what he says in verses 1 and 2? We have most of Isaiah's commentaries in here.
I got a detailed word for word.
Oh yeah? What's that called? Oh, critical.
Critical experimental.
Okay. Experimental? That sounds a little risky.
We're in
Isaiah 21.
This guy I found, well, it's written by different authors. This is by Fawcett.
Jameson, Fawcett, and Brown. Let me just give you a word about commentaries. I do not recommend reaching for a commentary until you have gotten all the meaning out of it that you can on your own first. Okay, otherwise you develop a habit, which is a lazy habit, of reaching for the commentary before you can doing any of your own thought. Alright, so dig as much as you can out on your own, and then when you're stuck, then reach for a commentary and see what others have researched. But always think about this: what others have researched to put into a commentary, you can research as well. It's harder, but it yields more in the end. Okay.
That's cool. I found out with that. So, you want me to save it now?
Yep.
Save it or read it?
Read it.
The treasure stealer part?
Yeah.
It says it's referring to the military stratagem employed by Cyrus in taking Babylon. Natalis translates, there is or will be a treacherous dealer, i.e. the Medo-Persian invader, to the treacherous dealer, which is Babylon. So, to the treacherous dealer, that's Babylon, is repaid in her own coin.
Okay. So Medo-Persia comes along to destroy Babylon. Babylon was treacherous, and so will Medo-Persia be treacherous. And in other words, the con artist gets conned.
Yes.
Okay.
It's kind of shows a little bit of humor of God too.
Yeah. Yeah.
He's like, you're so good, well, you're going to be served just the same way you serve others.
Yep. Exactly. So, the looter takes loot, Elam attack, Media lay siege. And here again, Medo-Persia is named by name. I will bring to an end all the groaning she caused, which is Babylon. So, the vision is thus, in verses 1 and 2. Verse 3 and 4, we mentioned that the reaction of Isaiah is totally physical. My body is racked with pain. Pangs seize me like those of a woman in labor. I am staggered by what I hear. I am bewildered by what I see. My heart falters. Fear makes me tremble. The twilight I longed for has become a horror to me. Quite amazing. Almost as if Isaiah is feeling sorry for the Babylonians at what's coming here. But you'll notice too that prophets tend to feel their visions and their prophecies very keenly in their bodies. It really affects them deeply. There's something much more happening here than what we understand about Old Testament prophetic ministry. So, how would you entitle verses 3 and 4? Can we say physical effects, just for now? Oh, prophet's pain, nice. That's alliteration. A prophet's pain. Okay. What do we have next in terms of a couplet? Verses 2, 3, 4, 5 and 6. Prepare the table, watch in the watchtower, eat, drink, arise, you princes, and anoint the shield. For thus hath the Lord said unto me, Go set a watchman, let him declare what he seeth. Let me read it from the NIV. They set the tables, they spread the rugs, they eat, they drink. Get up, you officers, oil the shields. Instead of anoint the shields, oil the shields. I imagine that oiling the shields is a custom that was used in military battle. But to easier deflect arrows coming at them, I don't know. That requires some study.
Arise, ye princes, and anoint the shield, he said.
Who is supposed to prepare the table? Who's watching in the watchtower? Is it Babylon?
This says about that, it's really interesting what this guy has to say.
Okay.
Would you like to hear it?
Yeah.
To begin with, we have to start at the beginning, the whole thing, that why it's the burden of the desert.
Okay.
The burden of the desert of the sea is, this guy says it's referring to how Semiramis, you know who Semiramis was?
No.
I guess he's some Babylonian guy, or maybe Assyrian before, but near Babylon, there was a plain,
Mm-hmm.
and it was once a desert, and it was become so again. So you see, okay, the plain is covered with water, the water of Euphrates before,
Oh, yes.
and this guy built up dikes and dams to make it flow into one channel through the city.
Oh, I see.
And so what this is, the desert that this guy made, basically what was once a plain turned into a desert, okay, which was once like a body of water.
Mm-hmm.
To find it, so it made it a desert. And the Cyrus, when he came, the Medici came,
Mhm.
he removed the dikes, and that's how he spread out the waters of the Euphrates, and that's how Babylon fell. That's how he was able to get into the city on the water channel.
Mm-hmm.
So, and so, speaking of all the other stuff, down to where it says prepare a table.
Yes.
The Fawcett says that this guy refers to the feast in Babylon, during which Cyrus opened the dikes to confront the Euphrates. And so...
Is Cyrus the one who came and the night that Belshazzar had his vision?
That's according to, I don't know, was he? Yeah, it was, because that's when the Persians took over. That's when Babylon fell.
Okay.
So,
And so they're setting the tables and spreading the rugs and eating and drinking is that fateful night that they were partying,
Mm-hmm.
and Daniel had to interpret what was written on the wall, and Isaiah sees this in his vision. And he's saying, "Get up, you officers! Stop your partying." Okay.
Get the watchtower.
All right. So I think verse 5 stands on its own. Vision of feasting.
Verse 5. Oh, another thing, in verse 1, it says a whirlwind in the south passed through.
Yes.
That there's a plain, the desert between Media and Babylonia.
Mhm.
There was a plain there, and that there was no protection from that side
Mhm.
for the wind. So
Mhm.
when the wind came, it was really bad. And it coming from the desert, from a terrible land, is taken by this guy to mean from Media to Persia. Because that's the way the south wind came from.
Yep.
That's the way this destruction of Babylon was going to come.
That's the direction that it came from.
Yeah. So it's actually pretty specific, isn't it?
Yes.
There's a reason for all that.
Yep. I'll tell you, the Word of God is precious. You see stuff like that, and someone comes along and explains the connections. It just becomes precious. So, verse 5, give me a title, somebody. Give me a heading.
Yeah, it's up in there, verse 5 to 6. Oh, never mind.
Okay.
It's silly. I just had set a watchman.
Okay. Let's say call for the soldiers
Okay.
to arise. The Babylonian soldiers, of course, because Isaiah sees something coming, and they don't, because their eyes are fogged with alcohol. Now, verses 6 and 7. Pardon me?
Sober up, soldiers.
Sober up, soldiers. That's really verse 5. Sober up the soldiers. But here we're talking about a lookout now in verses 6 and 7, right?
Yes.
For thus hath the Lord said unto me, Go set a watchman, let him declare what he seeth. And he saw a chariot with a couple of horsemen, a chariot of asses and a chariot of camels, and he hearkened diligently with much heed. This is strange. And he cried, A lion, my Lord. Okay, now before we go to the commentary this time,
I didn't know that.
no, let's try and figure this out. For thus saith the Lord, Go set a watchman, let him declare what he sees. And he saw a chariot with a couple of horsemen. Doesn't look like an impressive sight to me, does it? A chariot of asses, a chariot of camels. And he hearkened diligently with much heed. Who? The watchman? The watchman hearkened diligently with much heed, and he cried, A lion, my lord? I stand continually upon the watchtower in the daytime, and I am set in my ward whole nights. And behold, here cometh a chariot of men with a couple of horsemen. And he answered and said, Babylon is fallen, and all the graven images of her gods he hath broken unto the ground. This is a watchman who is watching for news of Babylon then. The NIV says, Go post a lookout and have him report what he sees. When he sees chariots with teams of horses, riders on donkeys, or riders on camels, let him be alert, fully alert.